strongly about. Your Honor, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the very difficult task that's ahead of you and recognize that there will be no easy solution. The reality of what it would take to ensure a healthy future for wild salmon would mean going up against something that is much bigger than all of us. There's a quote by Upton Sinclair that comes to mind on a daily basis, and it is this: that a man cannot understand something so long as his job depends on him not understanding. That the economy has become so dependent on the exploitation of the natural world and jobs have become a priority over a living a healthy planet has become far too apparent. That the words healthy economy are uttered more than healthy environment is telling of this. A good friend of mine took Zygmunt Bauman's line that people will go quietly and meekly into a gas chamber if only you allow them to believe it's a shower, and gave it a different perspective, changing it to people will go quietly and meekly to the end of the world if only you allow them to believe that salmon don't matter. Having attended most of these public forums and heard many people speak up for wild salmon, and having been part of a gathering of over 5,000 people in Victoria this past May for wild salmon, it is a relief to me to know that people are not willing to go quietly and meekly to the end of the world, but rather are willing to give their all to protect what matters. So what would it take to ensure a healthy future for Fraser River sockeye? Perhaps one could start by looking at the reasons why the Fraser River is fourth on the endangered rivers list in BC. From sewage to industrial agriculture and development, reduced protection for urban stream tributaries, rapid urbanization, urban runoff, transportation corridors, extensive logging on headwaters, heavy industrial pollution, along with many other devastating effects on the well-being of the river. And there's the average citizen who thinks nothing of dumping bleach down the drain. I imagine I would be pretty upset if someone came to my home and contaminated it the way the river has been contaminated. If you were to join us on the paddle for wild salmon this October, you would see with your own eyes the difference between Hope to Vancouver. You would see how the riverside changes from a beautiful forest, healthy ecosystems to gaping holes in the sides of Sumas Mountain, industrial development that gradually increases as you reach the city. The river and the salmon pay the price for such industry. I had a long conversation with someone from DFO about the salmon. I asked him, what if there were a policy in place that used salmon as a measuring stick as to whether or not certain practices could be used? Like what, he said. Well, what if this policy meant that in order for someone to develop, they would have to do so with zero impact on salmon habitat? What if all existing practices that harm salmon had to cease? That means logging practices, industrial development, agricultural practices that are harmful, road expansions, gravel extraction, mining would all have to ensure that their plans have zero impact on salmon, no compromise. How would that change things? His response was to laugh. He said there will always have to be compromise to habitat or it would be impossible for industry to operate. That was a very damning comment. We have compromised one of the mightiest rivers in BC and with it the habitat of salmon and so much more. Are we going to compromise wild salmon to death? I witnessed one such example of unnecessary compromise at a council meeting in Mission, where a request was put forth by developers to change the riparian area regulation from 30 meters to 15 in an area where it's a miracle that salmon come back to spawn at all, given that a dam built in the early 1900s all but killed the Say River salmon run. At the urging of the mayor, all council voted in favor of the developer, despite the lack of research on the environmental impact of this change. It's bad enough that the development in question is being planned on an island right in the midst of a sensitive ecosystem where salmon spawn, but that municipal council then has the power to compromise such habitat with little more than lifting a hand is unacceptable. Such accounts can be heard in every municipality. We should be very concerned that the voices of those who speak up on behalf of salmon habitat fall on deaf ears 9 times out of 10. When over 5,000 people gathered in Victoria this past May, there was little recognition that so many people were asking for wild salmon to be a priority and not fish farms. You will no doubt be hearing a lot about fish farms in the months to come. You've already heard them mention at virtually every public forum, as I've been there hearing it myself. You've already heard about the very real concerns of diseases and unnatural levels of sea lice and resistance to slice. I'd like to add 2 very basic facts. 1, Atlantic salmon do not belong in Pacific waters, period, while Pacific salmon do. And 2, as we've seen with the avian bird flu, with the swine flu, and with any historical account of species being crammed in close quarters for long periods of time, disease spreads in such conditions, and the farmed salmon are no exception. It's pretty basic. Fish farms never should have been introduced to begin with. Let's get them out immediately. Mother Nature gave us wild salmon that come to us freely and feed an entire ecosystem and culture. Industrial greed gave us fish farms that feed the pockets of Norwegian shareholders. Which one do you want to protect? I was recently part of a tour of the Fraser River that was organized with the intent of exploring ways that different interest groups fishing on the river could get along. This tour was organized in large part as a result of Chief Willie Charlie Chehalis getting shot in the face by a recreational fisherman last August. The amount of racism toward First Nation is an issue surrounding fishing that very much ties into this inquiry and the rules of DFO. I've heard one too many accounts of DFO assaulting First Nation people for illegal possession of salmon. Consider that. Illegal for people whose culture has always been linked to salmon to be in possession of salmon unless given the okay by a gun-toting DFO officer. It's concerning how much hatred is directed from sports fishermen who fish for sport money towards the indigenous who feed their family. Is this a result of there not being enough fish to go around? If so, this needs to change. As for sustainable harvesting practices, what comes to mind is a First Nation story I heard many years ago, in which a man went fishing by the river and saw that there were many salmon, and he thanked the spirit, cast his net, and pulled many salmon onto the shore. Looking back at the river, he saw that there were still many salmon, and he thought how he could feed his family and neighbors well over the winter. So he cast his net again, and again brought in many salmon. Still he saw there were many salmon in the river, and now he thought, there is still plenty. I will throw my net once more. And the third time he pulled in his net, and he saw that it was full of branches and stones. He looked at the shore and saw that where the salmon had been, now there were just twigs and rubble. The moral of the story should be obvious. Don't take more than you need. To sum up, I'd like to say this Friday, October 1st, there will be an event in Mission called In Praise of Wild Salmon. Alexander Morton, Chief Marilyn Baptiste from the Chilcotin, Rex Whaler, Ernie Cray, and many other wild salmon advocates will be there to celebrate this year's return and to announce that we mean to ensure that wild salmon are a priority. I'd like to invite you and everyone else who cares about wild salmon to be part of this evening. And I would like to thank you, Mr. Cohen, for the respect and courtesy you have shown to all the speakers and elders during the public hearings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Edwards.